Naval battle, a chronicle of the largest war in the Black Sea since World War II. The war between Russia and Ukraine has entered a new dimension, though it may sound like a pun. It's more accurate to say it's moved into the water. Russian forces are striking the ports of Odessa with particular intensity. And Ukraine evidently has set itself the goal of destroying Russia's shadow fleet and oil tankers. The situation has escalated to such an extent that it now resembles not so much a war between Russia and Ukraine, but rather a large-scale crisis in the Black Sea, in which almost all coastal countries are involved, albeit not by their own choice. So friends, let's analyze all of this together now. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. While you're liking and subscribing, in this episode we'll explain in detail what's happening in the Black Sea, how the president of Turkey is trying to negotiate with Putin and may even be involved in strikes on Russian ships, as well as how a NATO country shot down a drone, though it was a Ukrainian one. So, I'm getting started, and in the meantime, as I already asked, you go ahead and like this video and subscribe to our channel. In recent weeks, the scale of the war in the Black Sea has sharply escalated. For example, on the night of December 12th, Russian forces launched another strike on the Odessa region, resulting in damage to a civilian vessel in the port of Chornomorsk, as well as recorded damage to energy infrastructure facilities. Commenting on this situation, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that he had previously discussed the situation in the city and the condition of Odessa's residents with the president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. According to him, the current Russian strike, like many previous ones, had no military significance and could not have had any. In particular, a civilian vessel was damaged in the port of Chornomorsk. In the president's opinion, what happened demonstrates that the Russian side does not take seriously the possibility of a diplomatic settlement that currently exists and continues to wage a war aimed at destroying normal life in Ukraine and at annihilating civilians. The consequences of the attack were also reported by the Deputy Prime Minister for the Restoration of Ukraine, Oleksiy Kuleba. He wrote about this on his Telegram channel. According to him, the Russian side used Shahed-type attack drones and ballistic missiles against the territory of two ports. In the Odessa port, as a result of the shelling, an employee of a private company was wounded. He was given medical assistance. In addition, a container crane was damaged. In the port of Chornomorsk, as Kuleba clarified, a ferry under the Turkish flag was damaged. There is no preliminary information about any casualties. At the same time, a fire broke out on board one of the vessels. Emergency services carried out work to contain the fire and inspect the damage sustained. Thus, it can be assumed that Turkey, which is perhaps one of the main mediators between Ukraine and Russia, has become yet another involuntary participant in this war. As reported by journalists, a vessel belonging to the Turkish company Senkroru came under Russian attack in the port of Odessa. It is reported that one person on board was injured. At the same time, the cruel irony of fate is that the armed forces of the Russian Federation struck the Turkish ship on the very day when President Erdogan was meeting with his Russian counterpart Putin in Turkmenistan. It is symbolic that at this meeting, Erdogan emphasized the need to stop strikes, at least on energy facilities and ports. The Turkish president once again stated that his country would support peace efforts. In addition, all issues were discussed in detail, including the freezing of Russian assets by the European Union. Erdogan noted that efforts aimed at ending the war by establishing a just and lasting peace are of great value, and also expressed his belief in the possibility of making progress in areas that offer practical benefits for both sides. However, the Kremlin responded to Erdogan's recent peace proposals in a manner typical for Russia by decisively striking a Turkish vessel, an act that clearly demonstrated their firm stance and disregard for diplomatic overtures. Was it a demonstrative, deliberate strike or just a coincidence? That is the question that arises. About a month ago in the Black Sea, which can be considered Turkey's domain due to the length of its coastline, the largest war since World War II began. Yes, since October, Ukrainian drones have been regularly attacking one of Russia's largest ports, Novorossiysk. In November, for example, the main target of the Ukrainian armed forces attack was the Sheskharis transshipment complex, which is a key facility of the energy infrastructure of the Russian state company Transneft. At the same time, according to Russian opposition media, a military unit in Novorossiysk was hit, on the territory of which S-400 air defense systems are stationed. As journalists report, it concerns the area where the 1537th Red Banner Kuban Cossack Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment of the 51st Air Defense Division is based. According to satellite images and open-source information, several S-300 and S-400 SAM launchers, as well as Panzer S-1 air defense systems, are stationed there. Later, already in the month of November, naval drones struck 2 oil tankers from Russia's Shadow Fleet in the Black Sea. According to Turkish authorities, as a result of that attack, the tankers Kairos and Virat were damaged. These vessels sail under the flag of Gambia and are included in the sanctions lists of the United Kingdom and, accordingly, the European Union for transporting Russian oil in violation of international sanctions. A named, unnamed employee of the Security Service of Ukraine told BBC journalists that both tankers were not loaded with oil and were heading to the Russian maritime terminal in Novorossiysk. The Sea-Baby maritime drones disabled vessels that could have transported nearly $70 million worth of oil, thereby helping the Kremlin circumvent international sanctions, the comment stated at the time. It was at that time that the Turkish government condemned the Ukrainian attacks on the tankers. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Onku Keçeli stated that the attacks took place in Turkey's exclusive economic zone and posed a serious threat to shipping, lives, property, and environmental safety in the region. It was not only Ankara that voiced complaints to Ukraine. Thus, Kazakhstan reacted to the Ukrainian strike on the oil terminal of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium in Novorossiysk. At that time, Astana sent a protest to Ukraine, since about 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports passed through this terminal. In turn, Kyiv stated that they had taken Kazakhstan's concerns into account and noted that they acted within the bounds of self-defense. But already at the beginning of December, one of the NATO countries used force against Ukrainian drones. It was reported that Romanian Navy military divers, at the request of the Coast Guard, carried out an operation to neutralize an object in the Black Sea. As confirmed by the Romanian Ministry of Defense, the object turned out to be a Ukrainian maritime drone, the Sea-Baby. According to the agency, the drone was drifting, so after assessing the risks, the response team was authorized to destroy it by means of a controlled detonation. However, in a comment to Channel 24, the Security Service of Ukraine stated that not a single Sea-Baby had been lost. Whether this is true or not is no longer so important because the fact of an unprecedentedly tense situation in the Black Sea area remains a fact. But is everything really as clear-cut as it is presented in official press releases and politicians' statements? Among political experts, there is an opinion that Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, the president of Turkey, who is trying to publicly maneuver between Moscow and Kyiv, may be interested in strikes on Russian ships. After all, back on November 17th, it was reported that the Russian Federation's armed forces struck a Turkish ship that was carrying about 4,000 tons of liquefied gas and was docked at the port of Izmail. Therefore, as some analysts believe, they may be working together and, most importantly, for Ankara covertly against the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet. All the more so since it seems the president of Turkey has plenty of reasons for revenge. In this context, it is worth mentioning the Russian missile strike on the Bayraktar plant in Kyiv. This was reported by Ihor Zinkevich, co-founder of the public organization Varta 1 and a deputy of the Lviv City Council of the 8th Convocation. According to his information, despite the war and previous attacks, the Turkish company invested tens of millions of its own funds, conducted staff training, and was preparing production. Most of the facilities were almost ready to operate, and the main staff had already completed their training. According to his data, the damage was indeed significant. Whether Erdogan was truly offended by Putin is impossible to say for certain. However, it is worth remembering that one of the co-owners of the Bayraktar company is Selçuk Bayraktar, a businessman, engineer, technical director, and, most importantly, the president's son-in-law. It is he whom American journalists predict will be Erdogan's successor as the head of Turkey. So we have reason to believe that even if Recep Tayyip Erdoğan is not directly involved in operations to eliminate Russia's shadow fleet, at the very least, he is not hindering Ukrainian forces from carrying out attacks. After all, it's a family affair, as you can understand. But why is Ukraine hunting the shadow fleet? That's the question. And is there actually any effective result from this, or is it just karmic retribution? According to Pavel Aksyonov, a military observer for the Russian service of BBC News, there are already results from the Ukrainian attacks. In addition to the tankers Kairos, Virat, and Mersin, which are part of Russia's shadow fleet and transport oil, Ukraine also attacked the tanker Mid-Volga II, which had entered the temporarily occupied ports of Kerch and was carrying sunflower oil to Georgia. The first three tankers were attacked by sea drones, while Mid-Volga II was attacked by an aerial drone. According to Aksyonov, such attacks increase the war risk insurance rate for all commercial vessels entering Ukrainian or Russian ports. These rates are based on the value of the vessel itself. Within a week, for Ukraine, they increased from 0.4% to 0.5%, and for Russian ports from 0.6% to 0.65% to 0.8%. The volume of cargo transported through the ports of the Azov Black Sea region is decreasing even more, having dropped by 5.4% in 2024 due to military risks. In the journalist's opinion, Ukrainian operations in the Black Sea will prompt Russia to actively step up efforts to close the gap in the field of naval drones. These attacks also bring the issue of protecting commercial vessels to the forefront. According to the journalist, escorting every vessel with a warship would only provoke a more powerful strike. And if a new campaign involving naval and aerial drones begins at sea, it could completely change the security situation in the Black Sea, Aksyonov concluded. According to experts, Ukraine aims to increase the risks and costs of oil exports, especially in the Black Sea. However, such a strategy may also entail foreign policy costs. CNN links the increase in the intensity of strikes to two factors: the strengthening of intelligence cooperation between the US and Ukraine after Donald Trump expressed dissatisfaction with Moscow's position in the negotiations, and the decline in global oil prices, which reduces the market's sensitivity to such attacks. The long-term impact of the strikes on Russia's economy and its ability to wage war remains uncertain. Experts emphasize that attacks on the energy sector are just one tool of pressure and by themselves are unlikely to critically weaken Russia. At the same time, analysts believe that a prolonged combination of strikes on export infrastructure and strict sanctions, particularly restrictions against the largest oil companies, could potentially push Moscow toward negotiations if such pressure is maintained over a long period. But again, the question arises, what happens next? Will the situation just continue like this? Ukraine attacks Russian ports and Moscow responds with strikes on Odessa ports. According to the latest information, Ukrainian attacks are only the beginning of problems for the Russian Federation's shadow fleet. From now on, the European Union will impose sanctions on vessels transporting Russian oil, regardless of the sanctions packages. The first step in this direction will be taken as early as Monday, December 15th. At the meeting of the European Union Foreign Affairs Council, according to Deutsche Welle sources, about a dozen more vessels from the Russian Federation's shadow fleet will be added to the sanctions list. Precisely because work on new packages of restrictive measures often drags on for months, the European Union has decided to act more flexibly. It is important to add shadow fleet vessels to the sanctions lists immediately after they are identified, in order to continue the effective fight against circumventing sanctions against Russia. One of the diplomats emphasized this. Another noted that these measures have already had a significant effect on the Russian economy. In addition, sanctions outside of the packages can now also be imposed against accomplices of the shadow fleet. However, a unanimous decision of the Council of the European Union will still be required for this. So we can state that the situation in the Black Sea will change significantly very soon. However, whether this will be a lull before a peace agreement amid the sanctions or even larger-scale battles is difficult to predict at this point. Nevertheless, Ukraine continues to work against the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation. We hope that the European Union will join in, specifically in the form of out-of-package sanctions. And of course, we hope that very soon the Russian Federation will be held accountable for all the crimes it is committing against our country. So give us a like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments whether you are following the naval battles, so to speak, the clashes that are taking place. What are your thoughts regarding the peace plan? We will read your comments, and next time we'll tell you all the latest about what's happening in our country and the world, so you can understand where we are and where we're heading together. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone.